Hey, how you doing?
Great. Good. How are you?
I'm good. I wasn't sure. I got confused on the
I
time
know.
zone and just
I
sent you a
know.
message.
I know. Thanks. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm very happy you can join us here.
Yeah, no problem. I want
Uh,
to make sure that my email and stuff is turned off so it's not making any,
yeah.
you know, there we go.
Okay. So here we are, the famous Corey. How do you pronounce your last name? Congilio or
Yeah, you got it, Congilio.
excellent, excellent. So Corey is a fantastic guitar player, a young guitar player, very talented, and also a great educator.
Thank you.
Like I gotta tell you, I follow a lot of these like instructional, dudes
Yeah,
on
sure.
YouTube. You're my, I think, top three.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Thanks.
And I just want to quickly talk a little bit about your philosophy on the guitar. I think you have a lot to teach, and I'm also very impressed with your patience. Like you really break it down uh, to the nitty gritty and show every little move, and that really helps. That's
Oh,
fantastic.
good. Good.
And probably the most patient of all the instructors I've seen, because sometimes people just rush through and say, okay, this and that, and you mix major and minor and blah blah blah. But you explain it really in detail, and that's a great service to the community. One thing I wanted to ask you, and I also think you're a phenomenal guitar player.
Thank you.
Like sometimes you go, and you kind of stretch a little bit, and that's really very impressive. But my question, let's start with this: will you ever plan on teaching more advanced stuff? Because sometimes I'm like, oh God, I would like to learn this when you go into more advanced territory, but you always pull back into the basics. Uh, and I think some people may be thinking, why don't you teach us more like, playing outside? You have a good year, you go outside, you can bring it back home,
Mhm.
those types of things, which are, I realize, not that easy to teach.
Well, it's not that it's not that easy to teach, it's that the audience is smaller for it. And I make my living as a good online guitar instructor and a guitar player. And most of the people I encounter, they always say, "Oh, would you teach me this more complicated thing, or this, this diminished thing, or this melodic minor thing?" And they, in the same conversation, will tell me how they get lost in a 12-bar blues. So, no, 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 you're not ready for that
Yeah.
because I'm not ready for that. Like, I I use some of that stuff very sparingly because I find that in addition to connecting with a larger audience of people who are at an intermediate level, when I play a gig or when I do a session or something like that, the listener is usually at that place too. So there's not a lot of advanced listeners. So I like to play music in a way that everyone can appreciate. So have a little flurry of something that is more advanced. Now, funny that you asked that because um, I am putting together what I do like on Instagram or something is I'll play a minute of something really cool and flashy and then more advanced. So what I'm doing is I'm taking like my top 10 favorites of those and putting those together in a lesson package. Probably release it early next year. And it's got all of the stuff people want to hear, more chromatic stuff, more phrasing stuff that's different. So you'll see more of that of me branching into that because I want to do it in a way that is palatable in small pieces. Because you can take, I have it somewhere where Robin Ford released a book years ago where it was like two choruses of a B flat blues, and you could just study that for a year and get a lot out of it. Um, but as someone in the content creating world, I have to be creating all the time. So it's better for me to break down smaller lessons many times so that I have stuff that's out there to a wider audience. So it's a two double side, it's a double side with double sided coin or whatever they say. So there's a balance for sure.
Yeah, excellent answer. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. But I'm thinking some of your students graduate from that,
Yeah.
and now they're hungry for like, okay, now can you show me, some head turning stuff?
Yeah. For sure. It's interesting because I will put that stuff in a course, and it's, as much as I hear that from someone, it's still not as popular as
Yeah.
the more basic stuff. So it's something that I struggle with because, like I said, it takes me longer to put out the more complicated stuff
Yeah.
that has less of a viewer base. So it's pretty funny, but I will be doing that stuff more for sure.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, and we don't want to be selfish and just everybody pushing their own agenda. And I understand your position, of course. You
Well,
want to.
also too, what I'm trying to do is, after all these years, build a library. So when someone comes into my fold, I can start them at the bottom and not create any bad habits. And as they progress, they'll be with me the whole time. Now, of course, there's so many people teaching out there, and everyone has their own take on something. And I had, a dozen different teachers over the years. In person, not to mention the ones I get from like what everyone else watching gets. But when you say if you connect with me in such a way, you're going to be coming back to see what I have to offer. So I always want to be able to have something for someone, and there's so much more to do. Yeah.
So, in your experience, since you're so present and out there, and everybody's knows you, would you think this is now my interpretation? Would you think this is the golden age of the online guitar teaching? Uh, it looks like everybody's into it, and
Yeah,
the guitar is becoming real popular. Electric guitar is my experience. Everybody wants to kind of learn something about it, right?
definitely. It is the golden age, not only for learning and information, but also for the equipment that we're available to get. It's available to us. It's the best time ever for buying a guitar, buying an amp, buying pedals, all that fun stuff, computers, what we can do with them. Um, we're going to look back on this age as when there was a big push, because what's going to happen is the people that aren't used to technology at one point will die off, and it will just be a complete technology driven, generation that from generation to generation. But in any case, I believe it is. But the thing that's cool is, and this is what discourages people from trying to do things online, is they say, well, there's no place for me. It's already filled up, which isn't the case. Like, I felt that way. Even 3 years ago, when my friend, Brett Papa said, get a camera and start doing this on your own. And he's like, you're going to be successful at it. And I was already working with TrueFire for a number of years. So that was kind of scratching that itch. I was like, nah, they handle everything, and they edit it and they market it, and they just pay me, and that's fine, But then I started seeing, like, wow, there's a lot of power in owning your own material. And I mean, I own that material, but I don't own the masters, if that wants to, if you want to get into like a music business sort of sense.
Yeah.
So, but I have my own site now and my own courses, and um, it is a really, really fun way to kind of develop and bring us. I'm a small business owner at this point, and it's most musicians aren't, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, to me, you could teach or coach people on some skill, but you don't necessarily have to be the top player. For example, a basketball coach doesn't have to be like 7 feet tall, right?
Yeah, right.
However, when it comes to guitar, I think it really helps if you're already an accomplished
Yeah,
player.
sure.
Even though we know some people who not that great of a player, but really good at breaking it down and explaining, and that's
Yeah,
also valuable. But what I appreciate with people, guys like you, is you're also an awesome player, and that's inspiring. So now I know when you're teaching something that just you can show us what's the next level. Once you master that, we can go to the next level, right? And that is sometimes some people don't show that. They just kind of show you the basics, but you don't say, okay, now
right.
I'm gonna follow you, but is that as far as I can get, right?
Right.
So that's what I find interesting about your approach, because every now and then you bust out and you're just like, something that people like, oh, how did you do that, right? It's like, okay, take it
Yeah.
easy, one step at a time.
Right. Well, I know a few things to kind of build upon that is, I wanted to make sure that I really had a lot of experience in playing the guitar for music's sake. Because I've taught guitar lessons for 20 years, but I wanted to always offer the ability to say of my own personal anecdotes or something and say, oh, this one time when I was on stage doing this, because that is a whole other thing. We can play in our rooms, and then get with other people, and it completely goes out the window what we thought we knew, because
Yes.
you have to be uh, alert from all angles. There's things happening, other instruments playing, other things, other people, their personalities. So on my with my lesson site, workingclassguitar.com, we offer a once a month Zoom call for all of our subscribers. So it's really great because I'll get on just like you see me here, and there's 25 or 30 people on at one time. And one of the gentlemen that I've known forever, he's been a fan of mine. He joined, and he shared a video of himself playing with someone with an acoustic guitar, capo. He was playing at an F sharp. He had no idea how to accompany this guy or this other artist, and that is a whole category that a lot of people can't help with, but I know I can because I've been a side person for many, many years as well. So I had all of that area to share as well. So that's what I think part of the value of my teaching is that I have a lot of experience doing a lot of musical jobs because that's all I've ever done.
Yeah, yeah. And at least in my view, there was a period, and I don't really know exactly when we all felt that electric guitar is not happening anymore. Like any songs on the radio that had no guitar solo, everything was keyboard and
Right.
computerized. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. Electric guitar made its return and like entered the big stage. And I know in my neighborhood we have few guitar stores just popping up and with
Oh wow.
vintage equipment, and you
Yeah.
go in, everybody's buying, everybody's talking. This is a renaissance almost, in my opinion. What's your view on that? Did you see
I,
similar patterns?
yeah, I think there's a musical a renaissance happening, and it has to do a lot with this.
Uh,
Is that we have our own platform now and our own stage to show the world what we do or what we like to do and our hobbies and our passions. Um, yeah, but there was uh, a moment. I think it's cyclical because I do over the years I've done work for Martin Guitar, and in their museum they have a whole section of like the 80s where they literally have like Yamaha DX7 keyboard and like computers and stuff that like it was shown that like, oh, here's the end of guitar, right? And how once they went through that period in the early 90s happened, and then Eric Clapton was on Unplugged, boom, like acoustic guitar sales picked up again. And in that world, uh the popularity of American Idol or The Voice or these things, from what people told me in the retail world, really sparked acoustic guitar sales because people would come and try to be on these shows and play guitar and sing. And so that was something that helped. And then, um, you know, if we have to pick one person over the last 20 years, it's John Mayer, who's influenced. I see people now in their 20s and early 30s who are as influenced by John Mayer as I was Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix. I mean, I can hear it in their playing. I can see the way they dress, the guitars they choose, the gear they choose, the pedals, all of it. Like, it is very much influenced by what John did. When for me, John is just influenced by Stevie Ray Vaughan, Hendrix, a lot of other blues and blues rock guitar players, as well as those great songwriters too. So it's funny to be able to see like almost through two generations of music, but we have him to thank for a lot of that for sure, and people that invested in him more so, because if you know anything about the music business, he's had to have some kind breaks as well to get where he is. So I'm glad those people helped him.
Yeah, and he's a great role model because I
Yeah,
think he's fantastic. It's really good thing to look up to. Very musical guy, and also singing, composing,
yeah,
And in addition to those influences, probably Stevie Wonder and
yeah,
you
yeah. You know, lots of
amazing stuff. Mhm.
artists and writers for sure.
Oh yeah, I remember I think you mentioned the guitar synths in the
Mhm.
80s, and then we were moving more into computers, synthetic sounds. And at one point, it looked like, oh my God, like you won't be needing any real players. You can just have your
Yeah.
entire, track. But then I read somewhere some opinion that yes, you can synthesize drums and bass and keyboard and this and that and strings. But for some reason, they found it really challenging to emulate electric guitar and saxophone.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you, I remember that if you want to stay in the music business, your safest bet is be a guitar player
Yeah.
or a sax player.
Yeah.
And I don't know
Well,
if that's. Hmm?
go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish, please.
No, I'm just wondering if that's still the case, or have you heard of any advancements in?
Um, well, I just think there's so many avenues. You're talking about a time period when there wasn't the lane as many lanes of creativity maybe as there are now, where it
Mhm.
was like the music business went one way. It went through labels, it went through executives, it went through TV and film, and there was only a few ways to kind of really make a living unless you were playing live music in clubs, bars, restaurants, in so on. Um, in the live world, you know, there's always going to be a need for real players.
Yeah.
That's just a given. But in the recorded world, what's interesting is, so I used to get called to do sessions for um, a producer who fancied himself a remixer. He was also produced original material with artists, but he also remixed stuff too for like 9-minute dance club versions of things. And he would have me come play like nylon string on like a Latin type of track or electric on stuff. Sometimes I'd even play like real bass, but he'd have this completely in the box track. But as soon as you heard the guitars come in, it took on this new, more human quality just with one organic instrument. It was really interesting to kind of witness that in this was probably 2003 or 2004 or something like that. So there's not a lot of music jobs like there once was. So I don't know if any of them are safe.
Yeah.
So that being said, um, the world of programming, as they call it, to me is as much in art as playing, because I've seen what goes into it, and it's quite amazing what someone can do. Program, you have to be musical to do it right. You can get away with dragging and dropping and that sort of thing, and a lot of people do, but the really good stuff is made by people who are musicians first. You know.
Yeah. And also the live or the semi-live in studio, the performance
Mhm.
of real people. Uh, if if you have computers generate everything, and everything is on the grid,
Yeah.
and that's how most of a lot of the modern music, everything is impeccably on the grid. And when you listen to some of these old recordings from the 60s and the 70s
Oh
by
yeah.
the real band, then there's some magic, some special touch in them being slightly off, or speeding up a little bit, or pulling back a little bit, and creating that kind of a flow or that kind of a organic pace that all of a sudden you realize this sounds different. Because I think the Beatles, they were not even using click tracks or anything. They were just like
Oh
relying on
yeah.
Ringo just driving the beat.
Yeah, very, very few. You can hear, I mean, listen to Honky Tonk Woman, and it starts at one tempo and it's about 15 BPMs faster by the end of it.
Yeah,
But it feels great.
it was fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So there's there's a system to all of it that a lot of people don't consider. They just want to say, it was better then. Well, I would argue and say there's a lot of great music now that's being made with digital records. Like Chris Stapleton and artists like him and Jason Isbell and people that are produced by someone like Dave Cobb or someone a friend of my friend Butch Walker, who I adore. They make records like the old days, but a lot of times there's still a click track to
yeah,
play along to keep you sort of in there so you're not going too far. Because if the song, here's one thing that has to happen. I just thought of this analogy. If you gave 5 people a coloring book and you said, okay, I need you to finish this by the end of the day. I don't care what colors you use, just stay in the lines. So that's your grid, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna get a finished coloring book. Now, that's your studio time. That's your budget. Budgets are thin. Studios are expensive, even still, even if you're doing it from home, there's a lot of time and money involved. But if you gave somebody like, blank paper and you said, draw me whatever you want, let me know when you're ready, it might be 2 or 3 years, but it might be some of the coolest art you've ever heard,
Yeah.
So but it also might be cool. Somebody might have painted that in the grid really well, and that's cool to look at. But there's this more abstract thing over here. So there's two different kinds of art if you want to think about it. So those who find the artistry in the confines of a particular method is every bit as valid as those who do it in another way.
Absolutely.
So,
But
yeah.
Corey, interesting analogy or example that popped in my head. I was reading, it's been like almost 20 years ago. Paul McCartney created a short animated movie about some vegetarianism or something,
Uh-huh.
and he won the award, I think, at the Cannes Festival or something. So it was a
Okay.
short, 10-minute, animated feature. And then they interviewed him and like, oh, how did this happen? Like, yeah, my wife and I were into vegetarianism, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
this and that. And we had this idea and bam, 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 we got it. And then they asked them like, so did you use computers to generate the animation? He's like, no. Like, why? He says, we had very little time. And he
Oh
says,
wow.
yeah, he says, we need to use real people because it was a really, there was a lot of constraints, small budget, not enough time. They're like, what do you mean? Wouldn't computers be faster? No, with computers, everything takes forever. He says, when we were in the band back in the 60s, just one night we cut the entire LP, right? With
Right.
computers, you're tweaking those knobs. You're endless, tweaking and polishing, and now you have your ability to stretch and try millions of different versions. And he says that we didn't have time for that. So that's kind of an interesting counterpoint.
No, it is, but it's a time. It's a generational thing though, because that was faster than because the band was probably playing with each other a lot. They had a vibe. They had the songs probably quasi rehearsed already. Whereas in Nashville, for instance, you never hear the song when you walk in the room. You get handed a chart and you play it. So to get something that sounds cohesive, most people treat computers nowadays like a tape machine, at least in the Nashville session world. So you hit record and the band plays. And then the only thing you really fix is maybe a mistake here or there, or you do an overdubs with a guitar solo or another rhythm guitar. And then if there's keyboards and stuff that want to get added, background vocals and that sort of thing. So it very much gets treated like a tape machine.
Mhm.
But the difference is, a computer in the 70s or the 80s was like a turtle. Nowadays it's a Ferrari, and having to pay someone to keep a tape machine aligned and serviced, even if it's a digital tape machine like an ADAT or a DA88, those failed all the time. And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were until they figured out the digital world. Now it's like, I could make a record with this computer I'm talking to you on in this little room, and you'd never know the difference of where it was. So it is interesting, but yeah, in a time where you could have a band that was really cooking and rehearsed, I mean, they'd make jazz records every day on the Blue Note label.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
and under
yeah.
two microphones or one microphone, and they mix themselves.
One take, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but McCartney was talking about this animated feature. It was early 2000s, so already
Oh, okay.
computers, yeah, they were pretty fast. But he
Oh,
says, like, then you end up. There's, like you said, there's lots to be said for constraints. Somebody gives you,
yeah,
okay, budget, the time, the drop deadline.
yeah.
If they don't give you, you end up like Pink Floyd cutting the Dark Side of
Right.
the Moon for like 2 years, right, or whatever. They sit in the studio and it just like it spills over, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think this very famous funk guitar player, I think his name is Cory Wong.
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. He and it's very interesting. I watched him. He says we were trained. His generation was trained to play exactly on the grid. And he says, my discipline, I'm like a machine. I'm playing this funk on the grid.
Yep.
And beautiful music. You
Yeah.
know, fantastic. I don't know if you watched him or listened to him. He's amazing with his.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I'm not saying, but timing to me is that maybe to me personally, maybe the trickiest part of music. Or at least, I think if you have it down solid with the band, locking the groove, then even if you're making some mistakes, it's not such a big deal.
Right.
But if the timing is wonky, then even if you're playing brilliantly, somehow it does not gel, right?
If you're not playing rhythmically, you're not playing beautifully.
No, of course.
One of my favorite guitar players of all time is John Scofield, and John Scofield could play one note and manipulate it rhythmically so that it was like he was saying a lot with one note, phrases, because he really understands, like many great guitar players and many great musicians, understand pulse. And and I would agree. I would say furthermore, to back up with the teaching stuff, that's the biggest deficient area that I see in most people, is they have a less than average sense of time. And I can tell you that's something I work on still. It's one thing to play on the grid, but it's also something to learn how to play behind the grid or behind the beat, on top. It's all these different feels that you can approach music with, and it's a challenge. It's a real challenge for many of us. Some people not so much, but for a lot of people.
Yeah, some people seem to have been born with a metronome, built-in metronome. They don't have to worry about it. But yeah, and also I'm noticing in my case and people I play with and people, the tendency to hyperventilate and speed up. Sometimes that is the excitement of the performance, and the music is so exciting. Like you say, honky tonk, they all get worked up and they speed up. But sometimes it's a little bit of a trepidation. Now, I have to nail all these notes. I have charted my solo ahead of time, and I'm hyperventilate. I'm anxious, therefore I speed up. Right? Have you been noticing that with students, that this kind of nervous?
It's a global pandemic issue with regard to playing. Not to comment on our recent history, but I am currently becoming a major devotee of Kenny Werner and his book Effortless Mastery and his teaching. And a lot of that is going to sound weird because I'm not Kenny and I don't have the history to back up what I'm going to say. But what he says that kind of thing comes from, and I think I'm safe to say this, is caring too much. And you're caring so much about whether you're going to play it well that you don't. And the more relaxed you can make your body, the more of a fighting chance you'll have to actually play the music well. And he goes in much, 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 much deeper on how to do this. And that is where I think a lot of the anticipation comes from, and rushing, as we would call it, is, my mentor said to me one time, just relax. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was right. Like, the more that you relax, you can kind of see each measure coming at you. You're more prepared. If you're holding your breath, if you're closing your eyes, if you're nervous, you're tense, all that stuff is going to make you fumble. In depth, I can 100% say that's probably going to happen. So learning how to relax, learning how to breathe, learning how to learning the material well enough so that you can relax and breathe is good too. So, and there's ways to do that. There's ways to practice effectively and things like that. So yeah, so I do see that, quite a lot.
And that's a really excellent point that never occurred to me. If you care too much,
Yeah.
You, yeah. But one thing I've discovered, and this is by accident, like for example, I would prepare the entire solo, like let's say whatever, 12 bars, whatever, and I know every note, and then the recording starts, and I mess up on the third note. I just
Yeah.
that's now, of course, now you panic and you start fumbling,
Mhm.
but I learned to accept the mistake
Yeah.
and just run with it. And few times I fumble, I make a mistake, and then I just abandon my initial plan, just totally forget about it, and just go with the flow, do something else. Sometimes it sounds better than the preconceived original. So sometimes it's okay to just accept the mistake and roll with it,
Sure.
right? And just
Yeah.
consider it. Yeah, okay, we're now taking a
Well,
different.
yeah. Well, let me ask you this. When you prepared the solo, did you prepare it while listening and recording yourself previously? Or did you just write it out and then hit record and then try it?
That's a good question. I think I practice it dry.
Right.
I kind of figured out, okay, these are the notes that fit,
Yep.
and and everything sounds okay. There's no like a what's the word? There's a word for that. When you flub the note or something like
Clamp. Yeah.
it's like if you're playing let's say you're playing A blues and you hit B flat, it
Uh-huh.
kind of that note does not sit well in most cases, right? But it happens. So yeah, I practice dry, and maybe that's the mistake, right? I just okay, everything's under my fingers, everything's
Yeah.
cool. Okay, the recording starts. You have the red light. You start playing third note. I mess it up, right? Um, Probably caring too much and being like I have to nail it, right? But then I'm like, okay, so we're taking.
Not caring too much. You're gonna check this out now because it's such a weird thing to say. Like, why would I not care a lot about music? Well, if you listen to Kenny and who is an upper echelon musician, you'll see what I mean. But anyway, continue
Yeah,
because
sure,
it's
sure.
working
So
in your brain.
the way in my head, the way I interpret that, and I like it. You care too much about your version, but there's millions of versions.
Yeah.
So why do you claim that your version is now the best? The
Right.
universe is telling you. The universe is. I mean, I'm not being Mickey Mouse poetic.
Bring it
The
on.
universe
Bring
is
it on.
telling you, hey, take a different venue. This is
Yeah.
not a mistake.
The recording process is so beautiful because, and the reason I asked you that was because if you practice your golf swing at a driving range at the same time, but then you go to a course and you play and the wind's coming at you from a different direction.
Yeah.
It's a completely different thing. It's a different set of circumstances. Once you hit record and you're hearing the instruments, something I actually have a very hard time. One of my weaker points is playing written things because I love to improvise.
Mhm.
So I have a hard time with that. And that's why I don't play the Nashville touring thing that much anymore because you so often have to play the solos as close to the recording as you can. And I wouldn't say I dislike that. I like it in certain, times. But it can be kind of boring for one thing, especially after like the 10th show. But in any case, my point is once you start recording, you might hear something that made your body do something different, or your hands, or your brain was triggered to play a bend instead of a slide, you know, and then you're like, wow, okay, that might be totally different. Let's change it. And let your body and your mind accept that this is going to be a change for the better of the performance that I'm laying down. Um, as opposed to I have to nail it on the first take because that is the biggest, like one of the biggest farces in music is that happens. It rarely does.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Mick and Keith talk about that, where Mick would be like, "No, we worked on that for weeks." I remember hearing the band Tears for Fears when they recorded "Everybody Wants to Rule the World." They were recording that whole album, and they would record that song every day, whether they were working on it or not. They were practicing, rehearsing, and recording it every day. So it's going to get better. It's going to take on a new life as it goes. I mean, nobody sits down at the potter's wheel and just one day just comes up with this beautiful thing or, chisel something. It's constantly these little tweaks, and music is no different. And you're playing and your learning is completely the same way too.
Yeah, and this openness, right?
Yeah.
I watched one interview with Herbie Hancock,
Yeah.
and he was relaying the one incident from the '60s when he was in Miles Davis's band. And he says one night we were playing, and there's this song, blah blah blah, and I phenomenally messed up. I like hit the entire wrong, completely wrong chord, just like a cold shower.
Hmm.
He says, right there, Miles plays one note that makes everything right.
Yeah.
So that's the musicianship, right? He heard these like, okay, I'm going to pull you back.
Yeah. And I think Miles was of that um, thing I'm talking about, where the only thing he did care about was being in the moment with the music at that time. So his reaction was just that, a reaction to what Herbie played.
Yeah,
It's literally like, if the car starts to go off the road, you don't panic and start, doing that. You just want to bring it back, and because he's in the zone to do that, and you can do that with your own. I will watch something I play that I know I made mistakes on, and when I hear it, I'm like, that actually wasn't that bad. But in your head, it was this colossal disappointment.
yeah, yeah.
You think everybody saw it. It's like your pants fell down or something,
Yeah, I know. But again, that's because you cared about that version that you committed,
Yeah, yeah,
and you were vested in that. And like, oh my God, I'm losing my stock, right? I mean that
yeah,
the stock is going down. But yeah,
yeah.
Corey, it's like when we are riding a bicycle.
Hmm.
Um, if you're riding your bike and you lose your balance and
Yeah.
you feel like you're falling, let's say you're falling to the left, to the right, the way you correct that is going more to the right.
Hmm.
You just follow that, and then you turn your, and then you go back to your balance, right? So
Yeah.
that's the same thing when you trip, when you're playing, follow that direction and you pull yourself back, right?
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, but back to this caring, right?
Yeah. And not to be too hard on ourselves for when that happens is another huge thing that I've had to learn. And that's only a new uh revelation.
Yeah, and then like I say, it's good to record yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes you think, okay, I messed up royally and I'm so disappointed. And you go back and next day and listen to it, like, actually, like you say, it sounds good. I didn't mess up. And nobody noticed.
I'll go back and listen to something I've done a couple days later, or I'll hit play and I'll walk into the hallway and like get myself a cup of tea or do something and try to listen to it as a listener would, as opposed to a very like, someone who's like dissecting it. Like, okay, does this feel good? Does this sound like it's inspired when I hit play? Would somebody watching this go, oh, that feels good? If that happens, then I move on.
Yeah, yeah. I remember once I was invited on kind of short notice, last minute, to fill in for some, Mickey Mouse live performance
Mhm.
on the bass. And I'm not a bass player, but I can find my way on the bass guitar.
Yeah.
And I remember they asked, like, can you play something by the Beatles? And it's a epic McCartney bass, that something. And I tried to learn it verbatim, right, as much as I could. And then we were playing, and as I was playing, I messed up, right? So I'm like, okay, I totally messed up. So I started fumbling on the bass, just trying to find something. And I was like, oh man, this is so embarrassing. Okay, but then later, I went to this friend's house, and he recorded it, and he was playing it back. And I'm listening. I didn't record. I'm like, wow, this is a good bass player. I'm like, wait a minute, it's me.
You.
I was like, what? It was driving the song. I don't know, something happened because I kind of gave up, right? And I was like autopilot. And I
Yeah.
realized, man, I'm driving this band. And he was like, yeah, you were really good. I'm like, man, I thought I totally messed up, right?
Yeah.
So you never know, right? You cannot be the best judge maybe of your own performance, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
So another thing I wanted to ask you is when I was starting to learn guitar, it was before the internet. And back then we just had like tape record. We didn't have computers, right? We had turntables, tape recorders, and it was so hard to slow things down. I was trying to play by ear. There were very little books and stuff, and so it took me forever, really, honestly, to get to some point, right? But
Mhm.
now today, if I'm a kid, I
Yeah.
mean, you can speed that up and you can be there in like a matter of few
Right.
months, right? So
Yeah.
what do you how do you foresee that improving or changing our overall the musicality and the industry with this
That's a
phenomenal opportunity, right?
it's a good question as my dogs
Uh,
coming. Um, well, how do I see? I mean, I it's never going to go away for one thing.
mhm.
Um, but well, I mean, I just hope that the people that are benefiting from the technology will make good art with what they've learned, you know,
Right.
which I think people are, you know. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's 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 times when I say like, oh wow, I wish I had that technology when I was learning. But
Right.
at the same time, I know things that I've developed, like my vibrato or my feel, came from trying to mimic Albert King exactly, or
Mhm.
Stevie Ray Vaughan exactly. And you can only do that, excuse me, I believe, by rewinding all the time,
Yeah.
listening to that specific measure of music. How can I get that exactly the same?
Mm.
As opposed to learning it, but not really making it a part of your own playing. So that's the benefit, I think, of the because you can transcribe one like long solo from someone and really have that open up so many doors in your playing that you might not have thought about, as opposed to physically mastering 20 of those solos. You
Mhm.
know, it's like learning the language. Like if you go to live in a country, you're going to learn the language better than if you just did it with Duolingo or something like I'll try to
Oh
do.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You know,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I
kind of parallel I would draw from that for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the reason I'm asking this, recently I got back into Sonny Rollins, his
Yeah.
hard bop period, and
Mm.
I'm just completely obsessed about it for some reason. And then I was listening to this track called Road Strode from his saxophone Colossus, I think.
Mhm.
Just brilliant playing. And I'm like, oh my God, I mean, if if I could figure out how to play this on the guitar, that would be just a blast. And then
Yeah.
lo and behold, I go on YouTube, some kid
Yeah.
completely nailed it.
Oh, wow.
Like a young kid, he's playing Road Stroll. There's note to note. And I'm
That's
like,
awesome.
see, like a young kid, like 14-year-old kid, just killing it on that.
Oh, it's incredible.
He's gonna grow, I hope, into
Yeah.
like a brilliant musician. Because if you go back and listen to that, that's a tall order if you want to tackle
Yeah.
that one, right? It's really very hard. But then on the other hand, like you mentioned, um, nuances. Like for example, I watched this play, this little ditty by Kirk Fletcher, who I adore him. He's like fantastic
Yeah. He's
blues player. And then I grabbed it, right, and now I'm trying to emulate it.
great. Hmm.
And you know, he's not playing any like difficult things from the point of view of note selection and all that. But his phrasing and the way he's wrangling those strings, I just cannot get there.
Yeah.
I was trying and I was slowing it down, blah blah blah. I cannot get there. I don't know what he's doing. He has some special fingers that I don't know what. Right? You can't. At least I cannot approach it.
Yeah. It's like trying to copy an accent
Yeah.
from someone. You could say the words the same, but they, all of us as individual players live in, um, our own neighborhoods and
Mhm.
we grew up in them, metaphorically speaking. And Kirk's neighborhood is different than mine, and different than Corey Wong and different than, Mark Lettieri and different than, anybody you could name, and I sheepishly put my name next to those guys, but, but in any case, yeah, like, it's because it's their DNA attached to, that lick or that phrase or whatever. That's what's hard, you know.
It is
So
hard. I mean,
you could see like how much you'd have to invest time wise to mimic that, because most of the time, if you find somebody who's like a clone of someone, maybe there's because like when I was growing up playing, everybody was a Stevie Ray Vaughan clone,
Yeah.
You know, whether it was, you know, the more famous people who kind of embody that style or not, but you don't hear them break out into a bunch of other styles
Mhm.
because it takes a lifetime to develop either.
Yeah.
Whether it's your own personal style from nowhere or like accumulation of things, I should say, or you're like, man, I really want all of that thing that he does, and I'm going to devote my life to it because you have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're talking about going from Kirk Fletcher to Sonny Rollins on guitar, like that's pretty wide, you know,
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
regard to sound, you know, and
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
You know, they come from improvising, but you're talking about two different categories. You know,
Yeah. And I would say, even though I haven't managed that, it would be easier for me to nail Sonny Rollins's Road Strode solo, even though it will take months,
yeah.
than to nail what Kirk is doing in like a couple of notes.
Yes, I would agree with that because there's more. I mean, I don't want to say there's not personality in Sonny Rollins playing. Of course there is,
Yeah.
but it's not guitar personality. It's saxophone personality.
Yeah.
So you just have notes to copy as
Yeah.
opposed to with Kirk, you're trying to embody the spirit of what he's playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure if I was a saxophone player, I wouldn't be able to approach Sonny at all. I would give up.
Well,
Right?
what's interesting when they talk about saxophone players, it's always tone, tone, tone,
Yeah.
tone, because each horn player has their own tone. I
Yeah.
love Sonny's tone. Like I love that him and Dexter Gordon and people like that. Like, but then I also like, you know, Kenny Garrett or you name them. Like everybody has, or Eric Marienthal is much different than oh gosh, Coltrane or who, obviously they're altos and tenors, but I'm saying like everybody's got
Yeah.
a spirit on their horn that is unique.
Getz, right?
What's that?
Stan Getz.
Stan
Stan
Getz.
Getz.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has a unique tone that,
Absolutely.
yeah, nobody can approach. But when it comes to guitar, I don't know. There's this kind of typical guitar way of doing things, and then there's this stretching into like I wanna try and play like a piano player, right hand piano, right?
Mhm.
Or I wanna do a little bit like of saxophone or something. But to me, guitar is a completely unique instrument because you hold it, you hug it. It's
Mhm.
part of your body,
Mhm.
and you can do rhythm, you can do harmony, you can do
Yeah.
uh, melodic things. Plus, you can bend and you can yank it, and you can do all these weird things that you can do only on a guitar. No
Sure.
other. It's amazing thing, right? And it's your lifelong companion. Once you grab it, you never let it go of it, right?
Yeah. And
Like
your
we'll look.
relationship changes with it like a real person.
Yeah, you and I will be playing it till our last day, right? You
Yeah.
always have it by your bedside. You always like messing with it, right?
Yeah.
Corey. I mean, I'm just average, maybe even below average, but almost every time I pick up a guitar, I find something new, something that I've never heard in my life before. Isn't
Mhm.
that amazing? That it's just but messing around and also, hey man, look at this harmony. Look at I never what is this? I can't even name it, right?
Oh
Because
yeah.
you combine those fretted strings with open strings. You do some weird stuff. You do some weird.
Mhm.
It's incredible. It's a very exploratory to me instrument. I mean, many of those things nobody will play to listen to. But who cares? Like it is my satisfaction, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a palette of paints or whatever. I mean, you could mix them and get something new all the time.
Yeah,
So I think that's what kind of makes people keep coming back to it. Um, or like playing chess when there's like millions of different moves, that it takes to master and you never do. That's what I think is really kind of interesting about that instrument are the possibilities.
yeah,
Whereas with some instruments, you're a little more boxed in to
yeah,
one thing.
yeah. And for some reason, guitar somehow reflects your personality. Like if I meet a new friend and it happens to be a guitar player, if they pick up the guitar, the moment they start playing, I kind of know what kind of person they are.
Mhm.
It kind of communicates something
Always
about
felt
that person,
Yeah, I've
right?
always felt that. I feel like they're uh exactly, if you know the person well enough, you'll hear that in their playing for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a incredible instrument. But one thing I want to ask you is, and this is my challenge, right? But maybe you see it in your students as well.
Yeah.
For me, it's the hardest thing would be to teach someone how to, not how, but when to bend strings. Like we can teach people, okay, this is how you bend strings, and this is how you can,
Yeah.
depending on the position and the mechanics and the vibrato and whatnot. But when it comes to knowing when to bend versus when to slide, or
Mhm.
that to me remains a bit of a uncharted territory. Maybe you have some words of advice there.
I think the only thing I would say is, well, who are you listening to that bend a lot? If you're listening to a lot of jazz guitar players,
They
like
don't.
traditional jazz guitar, they're never bending strings.
Yeah, yeah.
For one, they're playing really heavy flat wound strings that are hard to bend. And that's not a part of the vocabulary that they have or want to have.
Yeah.
Um, blues players bend a lot more in rock, obviously blues and rock players, country players,
Mhm,
because they're emulating pedal steel guitar a lot. And
mhm,
there's also with a jazz player, I think they're they're not as, how can I say this? They're not emulating vocal qualities as much as some of the other more instruments that are like pop, sensibility. Like, you know, in rock or something, we might want to emulate something that a singer, so they want to kind of have that quality. Like one of my favorite players that does that, you wouldn't think of it, is Robert Cray. I think his guitar playing sounds just like his singing in a guitar. Like he's got these wonderful long tones and this beautiful high register, and it's so clean and just beautiful. But when you listen to like Chick Corea Electric Band, you know, Chick is bending notes on the keyboard. Frank Ombali's playing, and then Eric Marienthal's doing all those, sax bends.
mhm.
Um, so they brought that into they bring the blues and the rock into really, really incredible jazz. So I think it's the end of the day, to answer your question, like what are you influenced by and what are you trying to emulate?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so if you haven't transcribed and listened to a lot of bendy players, then you might not do it often, and it's not
Yeah,
wrong.
absolutely. But I'm noticing sometimes people who are not 100% steeped into blues, right? And
Yeah.
then they're playing, and every now and then, like, okay, they want to maybe bend the string, but it's not convincing. It does not carry that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know what you mean. If you're gonna bend, you have to be confident about it, 100%. And which is why, like Gary Moore or someone will like, bend and it'll just like knock your heart out because he's completely committed to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Oh yeah, good question.
Yeah. uh, so you mentioned John Scofield. What other guitar heroes from in your world would you recommend people start listening to and learning from?
Um, well, to be honest, I'm at an age now where I'm trying to, this is going to sound pompous, but think about this. I'm trying to be my own guitar hero. I'm trying to
Yeah.
be who I like as a player, and I've never done that.
Mhm.
Because for me, it was always about making a living and trying to copy what I thought would get me the gig,
Yeah.
or get me um, the particular, session or anything like that, to sound almost like everybody else on purpose, because would keep me employed. And then I realized, like, oh wow, actually that's not kind of the case. The more that you're just a best version of yourself is what people will gravitate towards. And I'm seeing, that's a positive thing from comments I'll get online about people
Mhm.
like my playing. As soon as I try to copy someone these days, it ends up just sounding like a bad version of it. I can evoke the spirit of a style sometimes, but um, I'm okay with how I play. Do I want to get better? Absolutely. Because I always want to be able to play what's in my head and translate it to my hands the best I can.
Yeah.
That being said, I progressed like many people did, where it was everything. When I first started playing, it was a lot of hard rock and metal, and then, these little moments where I found the Texas Flood Stevie Ray Vaughan cassette on my dad's dresser, and I was like, okay, let me check this out. It's like, whoa, what is he doing? And I was enamored. Then I found a Hendrix record in the attic, and then my uncle got me the Gary Moore Still Got the Blues. And then I was 18. I was studying with two different teachers at the same time. One was a jazz guy, one was more of like an Eric Johnson kind of player. And he said, "You've never heard of Robin Ford?" I was like, "No." And he gave me a record, changed my life. And for forever, it was like that was the progression. And then I went through these periods of, I really want to learn some funk. Well, I really want to learn this or that, some jazz, some fusion, whatever. And it was like I'd listen to nothing but Prince and Average White Band and Can Function and More Stay in the Time and study that stuff. And then I would listen to, I had a whole fusion period where it was all Scott Henderson and Schofield, Mike Stern, constantly. Then it was a period of, then I found Brent Mason and I was like, wow, this stuff is really, really cool. And at one point I did nothing but listen to that. And then I realized I wasn't born to play that kind of music. So I kind of stopped, but I took a lot from Brent. Talk about another guy with an amazing feel and pocket. Like, you don't think about it with country music, but his pocket is deep. He's got a great rhythmic feel. And I just started moving on from there. I started getting into more atmospheric stuff, listening to a lot of production by Daniel Lanois and being like, how can I play a note and have such a personality to it like he does, where doesn't have the physical ability as many guitar players, but he's sonically a genius. So it was all that stuff has been like a hero to me, and notice I didn't say, I did have a Van Halen period, but I couldn't play a Van Halen song if you held a gun to my head right now. I just don't have the interest to kind of copy that stuff. I'd rather listen to it. Although I think it's awesome. It's like groundbreaking. Don't get me wrong. But as far as the side of like guitar hero, like whether it's Vi, Satriani, all those kinds of guys, like I never got into that. And it was the other day I was in the airport and this guitar player I know saw me and he was like, "Oh, did you go to see the Aristocrats the other night?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't even know what that is." And he's like, "Oh, you know Guthrie Govan?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of that guy." It's like, it's just not the kind of music I listen to. Do I think it's incredible? Of course. But I never had really an avenue where I wanted to be that kind of guitar player. Now, that being said, I would like to make some guitar music that appeals to people at some point. So, but yeah, so it's been an evolution of guitar heroes, not one particular. That's a long.
Yeah, and I can relate. Similar with me. The only thing I skipped was the shredding period from the 80s.
Me too. Yeah.
Somehow could not get into that.
Well, there's oftentimes a lack of good songs. But Van Halen had fun songs. But then there was also, like Journey has amazing songs. But I don't see Neil Schon as a shredder. I see him as a brilliant rock guitar player. But I know what you mean. Like it happens in all genres where it becomes very much like kind of cookie cutter stuff, So yeah, I'm with you.
And to this day, like I just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a bar and they had a cover band, really awesome cover band, and they were on the money and everything was cool. And the guitar player had amazing chops. But playing those funk and whatever rhythm and blues songs from the 60s and 70s, and then he takes the solo. He's great, but you can sense that he's a shredder, and something is. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah,
he's not. I mean, yeah, everything's perfect and everything, but he's not pulling that vibe.
Yeah. Well, he spent more time in that other neighborhood. That's why.
Yeah. And then the accent, and the accent somehow wasn't matching. Like, why is this weird? Right?
Yeah, I know some people that can't. They could play you every solo to every AC/DC song, but they couldn't play a 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
Just the way they came up.
Yeah, I know, and a lot of people who, and myself including, when we play 12-bar blues, we can fake our way through it. But then when it comes to moving to the fifth chord, that's where we kind of start losing. I think that's where masters can really nail it. I think that is the secret sauce. If you know how to navigate from, you go like 1-4, blah blah, but then you go into 5, back to 1. This is the situation where you put your money notes in, right? Where you can really, and I think that's the biggest challenge, at least for me.
Okay.
finding that unique vocabulary. What do I do when we go to the five? Because that's where you feel that tension release is going to pay off, right?
Right.
And that's like you say, when you can see that people are not really that much into blues, they kind of fake their way through it.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're saying for sure. It's they kind of might gloss over the chord progression overall, where people that really understand blues and improvising um, give each chord its due. Understand that there's something to be said here on every measure.
Oh yeah, and even Robin Ford, I watched one of his uh, ruminations about the blues, and he was trying to explain what do you do when you go on the fifth chord, and then he kind of gave up, and he says, "You got to hear it." Like, I
Yeah,
don't know how else to put it. You got to hear it. If you don't hear it, there's no acrobatics that can help you there, right? You won't be convincing people that you did it, you nailed it, right?
right. Well, the best way to hear it is to listen to somebody that does it well, and then transcribe what they do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to ask you, Corey, and before we stop. I'm wondering, I'm watching some other instrumentalists with a piano player or the
Mhm.
bass and whatnot. And seems like only us guitarists are always looking at our fretting hand. And other people somehow learn to not have to constantly gaze at. Why is that? 'Cause sometimes I feel like if I could force myself not to look, I would be a better player. But then I cave in and I go back and I look.
Yeah, it's funny going back to the Kenny Werner stuff I'm listening to. One of the things he recommends is practicing in front of a mirror,
Mhm,
so you can connect more to the music as opposed to the validation of what your hands are doing.
mhm,
Um, and my philosophy, I mean, I may be interpreting him entirely wrong, but what I've been doing when I record myself for like an Instagram clip or something is I'm trying to watch myself play to make that happen. And I used to do that as a kid in my bedroom with my little mirror on my wall that I didn't even know I was doing that, but I
mhm.
was. And it's the um, I can't say I'm sure every improvising musician desires some sort of validation about their improvising, but I think as guitar players, speak because I am one, I want to see what I'm doing. I want to validate that myself. Oh, that was right. That was good. But so oftentimes if I close my eyes or don't look at the guitar, it comes off feeling more inspired than when I look at my hands. So it's a conscious effort for me to try and not. It looks weird sometimes if you're playing live and you're just like, but
Yeah.
it's helping, I think, more than it's hurting. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
At one point in my house, I had an upright bass,
Uh,
and I was messing with it. Uh, and I've noticed that for some reason on the upright bass, I don't need to look into my hand. I kind of find the notes. Of course, there's no frets, right? But by
oh,
hearing,
yeah.
it was very interesting to me that, hey, how come I don't have to look? I can jump up and down and find a note, but on the guitar, I'm still forced to check it out. Like you say, have to be more careful, right?
Yeah.
There's no, because even if you look at blind piano players, they find those keys perfectly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
No, you're
that's kind of
right.
interesting to me from
Yeah, I
the.
mean, like Jeff Healy's blind and played on his lap.
Yeah,
And
yes,
incredible.
exactly.
Yeah. Of course, I say blind, but I close my eyes. That's like me saying I can't see. Where
Yes.
it's like such a person. It's like being a sightist. Like like me trying to know what it's like to not be able to see.
There's no way. Yeah, exactly.
But no, I think that is not. It's, guitar players, we do it a lot, and it'd be probably helpful if we didn't. So.
Yeah, yeah. Great. I really appreciate your time, Corey. It's been a pleasure
Oh
to
my,
meet
yeah, I'm glad we could make it happen. I know we've
and
been trying to do this for a little while.
to talk about our passion and our love
For
for
sure.
guitar. Um, we can hopefully continue some time later when you get. I know you were cutting some records, and if you get to the next level, we can check where you're at.
Yeah, that's kind of like it's at a slow grind right now because it feels like the more, how can I say this? it's easier to move the bigger pieces of a record. The smaller parts take time, like doing the vocal recording, and I have a couple guitar overdubs, some things I have to add that we forgot to do when I was recording guitars. But I would say 80% of it is done. You know, there's maybe even a higher percentage. And it's just a collection of blues songs that I like that I said, okay, you know, because a lot of there's like an identity crisis, I think, with me is people don't know where to put me. Oh, you're a side person. Oh, you're a blues guitar player. Oh, you're an instructor. Well, like, no, I do all those things because I've had to make money. But I'm leaning into what I started doing, which is playing, you know, improvised music on that is blues based. So I took like 6 of like my favorite obscure blues tunes and recorded them my way. And my hope is that you know, anything I gain from this, I'll give to a charity that supports blues musicians. So I thought that would be kind of a fun project, since it's not my music to benefit off of because I didn't write it, you know. But you know, so many. If you look at, you know, Muddy Waters, BB King, Albert King, you know, those guys recorded other people's songs all the time. So I was like, all right, we'll start there and we'll see how it happens once I put my own music out.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic.
And then we can make it so that my subscribers and stuff can get access to the tracks, and I'll teach my solos, and you know, it's just all extended sort of thing from there. It'll be a lot of fun, I think. So that's about the people that support me as well as my own passion.
Fantastic. Hey, before we leave, maybe a contentious question. Do you have a favorite guitar, or you have a whole harem?
I have a bunch back there, you can tell, but I don't have a favorite. I have ones that kind of are more higher in the line of the rotation. My 61 Epiphone Casino I play all the time. I have a Novo Miras J that I was just playing. That's fun. Anything else over there? Let's see. It's just kind of all utilitarian. I don't play them that much. My PRS DGT for a modern guitar is probably the other one I play. But that's a good question, because after all these years, I'm still looking for a guitar that I feel like represents what I say and play. Can't find one. I've tried, and that's the fun part, is the trying.
Yeah, I've been trying different. Right now, I'm more into tellies, but maybe that will change.
Yeah, I mean, I went for a period where I did nothing for 10 years but play tellies, and I had 4 or 5 of them at any one time, and I'm just kind of like exhausted on the telly. I want something a little different. So I have some other guitars on the way this year, but I'm generally more interested these days in hollow or semi-hollow guitars. I know for a fact that those respond to the way I play real favorably, so I like that.
Yeah, I have a Godin Fifth Avenue Kingpin.
Yeah, those are cool.
I love it. It's pretty neat, and you can play it even if you don't plug it in. It has beautiful sound.
Yeah. Nice.
Awesome. Okay,
great.
Corey, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Alex.
Bottom of my heart. Have fun. Keep at it. I'm going to. Hopefully, we can